Yeah, I'm finally back and I'm logged into the command center and we've got some Helldivers to discuss because while I was away, we got yet another dev update. And this one was, at least for me, just as concerning, if not more concerning, than our last one. With some genuine WTF moments for sure, which is what I want to take a look at today. Remember to hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell as we dive once more into Helldivers. Very quickly, before we get into the heart of this discussion, we are currently nowhere close to finishing up this major order on Omicron to successfully extract 8.5 million times in order to secure the E711 to actually charge up and fire the Star of Peace, whatever that's going to eventually look like. The player stats aren't looking very robust either. Earlier this afternoon, we were looking at sub 42,000 divers logged on worldwide, but nearly 75% of those were actually hitting the bugs. But yeah, there you go. We'll get into the ins and outs of the new bug content like 𝗚𝗃 𝗚𝗎 and now Omicron, and how even when incentivized to play these planets and the new bug variants, it's not enough to entice divers to log on in force and tackle the major order. Alrighty, as you know, I was vacationing for the last few weeks, and just my luck, they released this last Democratic conversation, this time with Johan Pilestedt, on Christmas Day, which is when I was sitting in the airport starting my vacay. Now, Johan used to be Arrowhead's CEO, stepping down from that role to become their CCO, or Chief Creative Officer, and so he was there from minute one of the development of Helldivers 2 up until about late January 2025, when he went on sabbatical. So if there was someone who would know Helldivers, it's this guy. Now, as soon as this interview went live, I started seeing conversations all over the social channels and, of course, your DM pings telling me I had to check this thing out, and so I did. And I've now watched it cover to cover at least 5 times, maybe more, and this thing has me just as concerned with Helldivers as when I watched the last one of these. That time was with Niklas Malmborg, the design director. I also don't know when this actual interview took place, but as I listened to his responses, I thought that either A, when he walked away to take some time off, Johan really walked away and therefore had no idea what's been going on inside the game while he was away, or possibly option B, whoever prepped him for this interview gave him wildly inaccurate information, because there was point after point that I would listen to his response and say to myself, what he just said is the complete opposite of what the devs did. And when you stop and say to yourself, this is the head honcho that ran the show something like 9 years when it comes to HD2, he's saying one thing, the studio did the opposite, that's concerning. So, here we go. Johan's interview ran about 35 minutes in published length, but you can see some cheeky cuts along the way, and I suspect he spoke for much, much longer, with the team cutting out portions, possibly when he got a little too hard into the paint on a subject or two. But Johan talked about all sorts of topics like the dev team priorities, how they balance and tune the game, future wants and thoughts on the game, and a whole lot more. And much like I did with Niklas's interview, which I broke down in this video you see on screen, link also available in the video description, I wanted to go in now and create a series of pain points to highlight how counter some of these statements he's making are versus the reality of what we players have encountered actually in this game. Alright, pain point number 1 is actually Helldivers itself and how it chooses to prioritize fun and chaos versus frustration and vice versa. And I know that's really a broad subject, but here's Johan explaining the studio's approach to this concept.
Of course, we holistically look at all of the feedback and make decisions on what we think is going to have the largest effect on the greatest amount of people. With that said, though, we know that there's a lot of different voices. I mean, the entire community is not a unified singular entity. Instead, there's millions of individuals. And we need to look at this from the perspective of, well, there's a couple of people, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, that are saying one thing currently. But if we sort of change that balance thing, whatever that might be, that might negatively affect another part of the community that will then raise issues around that other issue. So all this goes to say is that We do look at what everybody is saying online. We try to bake that into what we're seeing from the telemetry and try to make holistic decisions. But those holistic decisions need to then be considered with the individual teams and the resources available to those specific issues. And when it comes to the specifics on like how do we look at the chaos and the just the pure joy, the party feeling of Helldivers versus the competitive or like the challenge feeling of Helldivers, how do we balance these two and how do we create an interesting experience going forward, both for new players coming in that just wants to blow shit up and have some fun, versus the players that are played for thousands of hours and wants more challenge.
Okay, and full disclosure, there was an entire section of Johan's response early on I removed because he talked about how the design team works and how there are certain groups that work on specific tasks, and he kind of took us through that again. But this comment about making holistic decisions was, for me, again, one of those aha moments, because along with his mention of holistic, he also says that they take the community feedback into consideration and then they make their decisions based on our feedback, which, as someone that has logged now 1,000 hours into Helldivers, spends time reading your comments, checks out Reddit, and posts weekly polls, I can say that their approach may, and I'm going to use that term loosely, may be holistic, but it's in their favor, the studio, and benefits their vision of the game. For instance, was there overwhelming player feedback out there to tone back the coyote? No, but Arrowhead did that anyways because it served their holistic vision of how fire status effects should work. Were there cries from the player base that SMGs and sidearms were too easy to handle and did too much damage at range? I would say no again, and if so, I never saw that argument, but nevertheless, Arrowhead went in and added both drag, actually doubling drag, and adding in sway to make these weapons handle worse and have a significant damage to distance drop-off. You know, I could keep going on with examples like how they buffed bleed damage by 10 times the amount it used to be, and also how frequently bleed is now applied to us. We weren't out here laughing at bleed damage as being weak, and we weren't out here bragging about how our Helldivers had too much health and that we needed to have that scaled back as well. I also didn't see any feedback hit the social sites about how the Berserkers and Warriors needed more durability and less fire status damage, but these were all changes, again, made by Arrowhead, again, and their grand idea to keep the game headed holistically in the direction that they want, just minus our feedback. Johan also curiously speaks about how they try to balance the fun factor, as in players who just want to log in and blow shit up versus the hardcore divers who have thousands of hours in the game, as if these are somehow two entirely different groups of players. But here's the catch. They aren't. Look, Helldivers is not an overly difficult game. It never has been. We are sent down planetside with a laundry list of to-dos to complete the objective, but the draw, the attraction for Helldivers has always been about blowing shit up. I mean, that hasn't changed if you're diving trivial difficulty versus super Helldive. You want to make it more challenging, Johan? You want to make it more entertaining, more engaging for those hardcore faithful? Give them more shit to blow up. Notice I didn't say remove the majority of light and medium enemies and in their place throw in swarms of elites like war striders or flesh mobs, which, by the way, Johan does mention several times during this interview that they now can't somehow spawn in more enemies because it would hurt performance, but we've seen recently hyper spawns on the rapid acquisition missions, and we've seen crazy spawns in the past, like on Meridia, or like when the Predator Strain patrols were coming at us from all angles, which definitely left me scratching my head asking why we can have those juiced up spawns rarely, but we can't have them consistently. Know what I mean? With that in mind, the spawn stat is, here's Painpoint number 2, difficulty versus annoyance. And Johan's answer to this was actually very mind-boggling. But first, here's his response to the question of if we will ever get harder difficulties or modes in the game.
Getting to the top tier of players and providing a real challenge for them is something that is absolutely on the roadmap. And it's something that we're constantly talking about how to achieve that. The challenge here is actually performance. because we can't add more enemies because then performance will suffer too much. Instead, there needs to be other ways of approaching that kind of difficulty. And we don't want to do it either by just boosting health of enemies or any such mechanics, because what that would do is that it would remove some of the core enjoyment of what makes Helldivers.
Remember back when I said that I thought that either Johan had really checked out while on sabbatical or he was briefed with incorrect info? Well, here it is, out on full display. First off, he says we can't have more enemies because that would hurt performance, but we've already had them. Rapid acquisition in the past, Meridia, the aforementioned predator strain spawns. We've seen genuine difficulty scaling when the game somehow allows for crazy spawn rates and gives us, again, to quote him, more shit to blow up. But this part where he says that they don't want to do it by boosting the health of enemies or any such mechanics was... yeah. Has he not played the game in the past year and a half? I mean, flying health pools with insta-melt lasers that did 1,500 damage per shot, aka Leviathans, flying bile dragons with all the health of a regular bile titan, but far more mobile, had a crazy fire breath attack, and the wings, which were said to be areas you could damage, did not take damage. Or how about the enraged health pools that could be found in patrols of 4 and would charge at you with ruthless aggression, aka flesh mobs? I could also throw in here War Striders, which used to be equipped with cringe turrets and popped out grenades all over the place. And they had no definable weak points, and of course they were covered in heavy armor all over. We've also seen durable damage buffs to common enemies and so on. I mean, in reality, what Johan says here is exactly what the studio has been doing with the game, because he says they can't add in more enemies, so instead, they've been replacing the mobs and the density of those mobs and the spawn patrols with these walking health pools. Now, yes, many of these enemy variants have eventually been modified since their respective launch dates. For instance, again, the flesh mobs, which in the last patch lost 1,000 HP, dropping them from 6,000 down to 5,000, while their faces now deal extra damage to their main health pools. But I also want to mention they picked up 15% more durability basically to their entire bodies, and they now also take 20% less fire damage. But yeah, the statement about how, number one, the studio can't add in more enemies because performance, yet we've seen more enemies, and very recently, i.e. the rapid acquisition missions, and number two, the studio wants to avoid boosting enemy health pools to create difficulty when in fact, that is exactly what they've been doing, showed me that words versus actions with Arrowhead are two entirely different affairs. And finally, pain point number 3, throughout this interview, I kept hearing, we can't do that. Or, we started that, but then shelved it. Or, hey, that's a great suggestion from the community, but unfortunately, we as a studio haven't had time to explore it. There was a question about getting flying vehicles for the Helldivers, but it was met with an answer talking about the complexity of that player request. There was a question about letting us actually swim across water. His answer, we'd have to look at how that changes the dynamics of the gameplay, okay? There was even a question about mech customization, which we had in Helldivers 1. The studio has apparently looked at it, and since they already gave us 2 different mechs, blah, 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 yeah, you get the picture. We are rapidly running up on the 2-year anniversary of this game's launch, and we're still asking for a bestiary. We still don't have a compendium. Hell, we haven't seen a ship module to work towards and unlock since July 5th, 2024. Johan repeatedly mentions the design team and how they are still relatively small in numbers, but, maybe it's time to bring in some outside help and keep them on retainer, much like they did with 𝗙𝗄𝗄𝗃 for the Slim PC branch on Steam. If the in-house developers are too bogged down, they're too overworked, hire in some outside help to tackle these things. I mean, it can't hurt, right? But yeah, I know I'm kind of late to market with my thoughts and breakdown of the CCO's democratic conversation, and there's actually a bunch more here to sift through, but in many ways, to hear the man who was at the helm of HD2's development say things about holistic decisions while mentioning community feedback and how valuable it was in their decision making, while all the while installing all sorts of net negative effects to players. How he talks about not wanting to create health pools as difficulty sliders, yeah, but Arrowhead clearly went full on with that design concept. And, the rest of it, it left me both confused and massively concerned. Now, hopefully, Johan can get back into the studio and get the real story as to what the hell this studio's been up to while he was away, as well as get up to speed on the state of the game. Because as a whole, I do think his heart is in the right place, but he's been badly misinformed. Again, that's just my take on it all, and here's where you get to sound off with your thoughts. What are you thinking about all of his statements and all those rumors flying around about next week and Helldivers? Are you getting excited yet? Drop a comment and let's see where the community lands on all of this. Remember to hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell to receive my latest upload alerts. Thanks so much to all of our community members. You guys were super supportive while I was away on vacation, and for that, I wanted to say thank you. If you are interested in joining the ranks of our group, check on my YouTube home screen for the join button, where we have tiers and perks for all levels of supporters. And until the next one, this is 𝐷𝐿𝐵𝘆𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿 signing off.